December 17, 1943. A farmhouse kitchen in rural Wisconsin. Ellen Richardson held a letter postmarked from Stalag Luft III, Germany, addressed in her husband's handwriting. The envelope had been opened and resealed by German censors. Inside was a single page of text written on Red Cross stationery, each word carefully formed, nothing out of place. Her husband Captain James Richardson had been shot down over France 7 months earlier. This was his third letter home. She read it twice at the kitchen table, then a third time upstairs in their bedroom, searching for something between the lines that she could not name. The letter said he was well. Said the food was adequate. Said he missed home. Said he thought of her constantly. 158 words across 14 lines. Standard prisoner of war correspondence approved by the International Red Cross and inspected by German military intelligence. What Ellen Richardson did not know was that her husband had spent 4 hours writing those 158 words. Had rewritten them 6 times. Had memorized the cipher key before his capture. Had encoded information about camp layout, guard rotations, and escape tunnel locations into seemingly innocent sentences about family memories and Wisconsin weather. By December 1943, more than 130,000 Allied soldiers were held in German prison camps. Another 48,000 were held by Italy. The Red Cross negotiated letter privileges. Each prisoner could send 2 letters and 4 postcards per month. Each letter was limited to roughly 250 words. Every piece of correspondence passed through multiple layers of censorship. German intelligence officers read each word, checked for obvious codes, looked for hidden messages, removed or redacted anything that might contain military information. The system was designed to maintain morale while preventing security breaches. Prisoners could tell their families they were alive. Families could send news from home. But the letters existed in a strange space between truth and performance. What could be said was limited. What could be understood was filtered. The words on the page were genuine but incomplete. Reality existed somewhere beyond what the censors allowed. For families waiting at home, the letters were everything. Proof of life. Evidence of survival. A connection across distance and war. Ellen Richardson kept every letter from her husband in a wooden box under her bed. She read them before sleep. Memorized the phrases. Analyzed the word choices. But she could not decode what she did not know was coded. The secret existed in plain sight. Her husband had written it. She had read it. Neither had acknowledged it. The truth was there but invisible. The practice of encoding hidden messages in prisoner letters was not new to World War II. During the Napoleonic Wars, French prisoners in Britain used invisible inks made from urine and lemon juice. During the American Civil War, Confederate prisoners sent coded letters using acrostic patterns where the first letter of each line spelled out messages. During World War I, British prisoners in Germany used pinpricks beneath certain letters to indicate coded text. But World War II required more sophisticated methods. German censors were trained to detect invisible inks, acrostic patterns and pinprick codes. The censorship system was rigorous and methodical. Each camp had dedicated intelligence officers who examined prisoner correspondence. They used chemical tests for invisible inks. They held letters up to light searching for pinpricks. They analyzed word frequency and sentence structure. Simple codes were detected and punished. What developed instead was a system of codes so subtle they appeared completely natural. Prisoners memorized cipher keys before deployment, knowing they might need them if captured. Intelligence officers embedded coded instructions in seemingly routine Red Cross packages. Families were trained to recognize specific phrases that indicated distress or escape plans. The entire system operated in shadow. Nothing was written down. Nothing was acknowledged. Everything depended on memory and trust. Captain Richardson had memorized his cipher key during training at Langley Field, Virginia, in early 1942. The key was based on childhood memories that only he and his wife would recognize. Every 5th word in his letters corresponded to a word in a specific children's book they had read together during their honeymoon. The book was The Wind in the Willows. The cipher was simple but nearly undetectable. German censors saw a letter about Wisconsin winters and family memories. British intelligence officers who intercepted copies of the letter saw a map of guard towers and searchlight patterns. Ellen Richardson owned a copy of The Wind in the Willows. It sat on a bookshelf in their living room. She had never connected it to the letters. Had never been told to. The communication was one way. Her husband sent encoded intelligence. She received apparently normal letters. The asymmetry was intentional. If families knew about the codes, they might inadvertently reveal them through their own correspondence. The prisoners bore the burden alone. By winter 1943, thousands of prisoners were using similar systems. Some used acrostic patterns where every third sentence's first letter spelled a message. Some used numerical codes where the number of words in each sentence corresponded to coordinates. Some used family photographs where the position of people in the photo indicated information about camp layout. The methods varied by camp and nationality, but the principle remained the same: hide the message within normal communication. The German censorship system created unintended opportunities. Because letters were limited to 250 words, prisoners learned to make every word count. They developed compressed language where simple phrases carried multiple meanings. The weather has been cold might indicate guard tower positions based on the specific words used for cold. I miss Sundays at home might encode information about chapel services where prisoners gathered to plan escapes. The restriction itself became the tool. What the families understood was surface truth. Their sons and husbands and brothers were alive. They were writing letters. They remembered home. But beneath that surface was an entire hidden conversation. Intelligence flowed from prison camps to Allied command centers through these seemingly innocent letters. Escape plans were coordinated. Guard weaknesses were identified. Camp layouts were mapped. All of it transmitted through words about weather and food and memories. Ellen Richardson's life followed the rhythm of letter arrivals. She checked the mail every morning. When a letter from Germany arrived, she cleared the kitchen table and read it alone before sharing it with anyone else. She traced the words with her finger. She studied the handwriting for changes that might indicate stress or illness. She looked for what she was allowed to see. She did not look for what was hidden because she did not know it was there. In February 1944, she received a letter that mentioned their honeymoon in unusual detail. Richardson wrote about the restaurant where they had dinner on their wedding night, described the wallpaper pattern in their hotel room, recalled specific conversations they had during a walk by the river. The letter was longer than usual, more specific, more emotional. Ellen cried reading it. She thought her husband was feeling particularly homesick. She did not know he was describing an escape plan. The code was in the details. The restaurant represented a tunnel entrance location. The wallpaper pattern indicated which building. The river walk conversation encoded the timing. The entire escape plan existed in what appeared to be romantic nostalgia. German censors had read the letter and approved it. They saw a homesick prisoner writing to his wife. British intelligence officers who intercepted the letter understood it immediately. They cross-referenced it with other coded messages from Stalag Luft III. They identified the plan. They prepared. What neither Ellen Richardson nor the German censors nor British intelligence fully understood was that the letter contained another layer of meaning. The escape plan was real. But Captain Richardson had also encoded a personal message within the intelligence data. A message only his wife could understand if she ever learned the cipher. A message about fear and hope and the effort required to maintain sanity inside barbed wire. That message would not be decoded for another 60 years. March 1944. Stalag Luft III, 100 miles southeast of Berlin. The camp held approximately 10,000 Allied Air Force officers. The Germans considered Air Force prisoners low-security risks. Officers, educated, unlikely to attempt violent escapes. The assessment was wrong. Inside the camp were some of the most determined escape artists of the war. Pilots and navigators and bombardiers who had spent months perfecting systems for digging tunnels, forging documents, creating civilian clothing and coordinating with intelligence networks outside the wire. The letter system was part of a larger escape infrastructure. Letters went out containing coded messages. Red Cross packages came in containing escape materials. Maps printed on silk were sewn into playing cards. Compasses were hidden in buttons. German currency was concealed in checkerboards. The entire camp operated as an intelligence gathering and escape planning center disguised as a prisoner facility. Captain Richardson worked in the camp's intelligence section, what the prisoners called X organization. His role was coordinating coded correspondence with MI9, the British intelligence unit responsible for escape and evasion. He memorized messages from escape committee leaders, encoded them into letters, sent them through the approved mail system. The Germans allowed the letters to leave. MI9 officers in London received copies. The intelligence flowed both ways. The cipher system Richardson used was simple enough to memorize but complex enough to evade detection. Every fifth word in his letter corresponded to a specific page and line number in The Wind in the Willows. The pattern repeated through the letter. To anyone without the book and the knowledge of the system, the letter appeared completely normal. With the book, the pattern revealed detailed information about guard schedules, searchlight patterns, tunnel depths, and planned escape routes. What made the system effective was its basis in genuine emotion. Richardson was not fabricating sentiment to hide codes. His longing for home was real. His memories of Ellen were genuine. The fear and isolation and determination in his words were authentic. The codes existed within truth rather than replacing it. German censors read letters full of human emotion and approved them because the emotion obscured the information embedded within it. In February 1944, the escape committee at Stalag Luft III finalized plans for the largest prisoner breakout of the war. 3 tunnels had been dug over 15 months. Tom, Dick, and Harry. Each extended more than 300 feet beyond the wire. Each required moving tons of sand in absolute secrecy. Each represented months of coordinated effort by hundreds of prisoners. The escape was scheduled for March 24. More than 200 prisoners would attempt to reach neutral territory. Richardson's role was communicating the plan to London. The escape committee needed MI9 to prepare reception networks in occupied France. They needed safe houses identified. They needed contact procedures established. They needed the external support that would mean the difference between successful evasion and recapture. The information had to be transmitted through letters that German censors would approve. The encoding process took hours. Richardson would receive verbal instructions from escape committee leaders. He would mentally compose a letter that contained the required information while appearing completely innocent. He would write it out by hand, checking each word against the cipher key he had memorized. A single mistake could expose the entire system. The pressure was constant. The stakes were life or death. On March 3, Richardson wrote the letter Ellen would receive in mid-March. The letter about their honeymoon. The letter about the restaurant and the wallpaper in the river walk. Every detail encoded multiple pieces of information. The date of the honeymoon dinner indicated the escape date. The restaurant location indicated tunnel exit point. The description of their conversation contained information about how many prisoners would escape and their planned routes through occupied Europe. German censors read the letter. They checked it for obvious codes. They found none. The emotional tone was consistent with Richardson's previous correspondence. The details about the honeymoon were specific enough to be genuine but general enough to pass censorship. The letter was approved and forwarded to the International Red Cross for delivery. It left the camp on March 5. It would reach London via neutral Sweden by March 10. It would arrive at Ellen Richardson's farmhouse in Wisconsin on March 18. MI9 received their copy through a parallel intelligence network. They decoded it within 24 hours. Cross-referenced it with other coded messages from Stalag Luft III. Confirmed the escape date and routes. Began coordinating with resistance networks in France, Belgium, and Holland. Prepared safe houses. Established contact procedures. The intelligence embedded in a homesick prisoner's letter to his wife became the foundation for one of the largest escape support operations of the war. On March 24, 1944 at approximately 10 p.m., prisoners began moving through Tunnel Harry. The tunnel exit was outside the camp wire, hidden in a grove of trees. The plan was for 200 prisoners to escape before dawn. They would disperse across occupied Europe using forged documents, civilian clothing, and contact procedures coordinated through the letters that had passed German censorship for months. The escape failed. The tunnel exit emerged short of the tree line, visible from a guard tower. At 4:55 a.m., a German guard discovered prisoner number 77 emerging from the tunnel. The alarm was raised. Of the 76 prisoners who had escaped, 73 were recaptured within 2 weeks. Hitler ordered all 73 to be executed. Göring and Himmler negotiated the number down. On Hitler's orders, 50 prisoners were shot. The official story was they were killed while attempting to escape after recapture. The truth was they were murdered on roadsides and in forests as reprisal. Captain Richardson was not among the escapers. His role in the intelligence section was considered too valuable. The escape committee determined that maintaining the coded letter system was more important than his participation in the breakout. He remained in the camp, watched prisoners leave, waited for news of success or failure. When word came back that 50 had been murdered, he continued writing letters. The system could not stop. Intelligence was still needed. The families still needed proof of life. The letter Ellen Richardson received on March 18 contained information about an escape that had already failed. She read it without knowing what it meant. She cried because it made her think of their honeymoon. She kept it with the others in the wooden box under her bed. The intelligence it contained had already served its purpose. MI9 had decoded it. Resistance networks had prepared. The escape had been attempted and crushed. But the letter existed as something else now. Evidence of the dual life prisoners led. The surface of connection. The depth of hidden reality. After the escape and the murders, German security at Stalag Luft III intensified. Letters were subjected to more rigorous examination. Chemical tests increased. Censors spent more time analyzing word patterns. The prisoners adapted. They made their codes more subtle. They extended the intervals between encoded letters. They used more emotion and less information. The system survived because it was based on human connection rather than pure cryptography. Richardson's letters to Ellen changed after March 1944. They became shorter. More focused on memory than current conditions. Less detailed about camp life. The shift was partly security adaptation and partly psychological. The murder of 50 prisoners had broken something in the camp. The illusion that international law provided protection was gone. The prisoners understood they were hostages whose lives depended on Germany's willingness to maintain conventions that Germany had already abandoned. But the letters continued. Richardson wrote. Ellen received. The rhythm of correspondence provided structure to both their lives. For Richardson, writing to Ellen was a way of maintaining identity. Inside the wire, prisoner identity could dissolve into number and routine. The letters asserted personhood. Insisted on continuity with pre-war life. Claimed a future beyond the camp. Even if the words were read by censors. Even if the messages were encoded. Even if Ellen could not understand what was hidden, the act of writing itself was resistance. For Ellen, the letters were proof against fear. As long as letters arrived, her husband was alive. The gaps between letters were torture. Every day without mail brought thoughts of death or injury or punishment. When a letter finally arrived, relief overwhelmed everything else. She did not question why some letters were more detailed than others. Did not wonder about the specific memories her husband chose to share. She accepted the words at face value because she needed to believe in the connection they represented. In June 1944, as Allied forces landed in Normandy and began pushing across France, the mood in Stalag Luft III shifted. Prisoners began to believe liberation was possible, that they might survive to return home, that the letters they wrote might someday be replaced by direct conversation. Richardson began encoding different information. No longer escape plans. Now intelligence about German military movements observable from the camp. Troop trains passing nearby. Aircraft overhead. Anything that might help Allied planners understand German defensive positions. The letters from summer and fall 1944 were different, more hopeful. Richardson wrote about plans for after the war. Where they would live. What work he might do. Children they might have. The codes were still present, embedded in the hopeful language, but the emotional content shifted. The future became imaginable again. Ellen noticed the change in tone. Allowed herself to believe it. Began planning for reunion even as the letters continued to carry intelligence that she could not see. By December 1944, Soviet forces were advancing from the east. German guards at Stalag Luft III became nervous. The prisoners could hear artillery in the distance. In January 1945, as Soviet forces approached, the Germans evacuated the camp. 10,000 prisoners were marched west in the middle of winter. Richardson carried nothing but the clothes he wore and memories of the cipher system he had used for 2 years. The letters stopped. For Ellen Richardson, the silence was worse than any coded message her husband had sent. This time there were no words to decode. Only fear. January 27, 1945. Somewhere in western Poland. Captain Richardson walked in a column of prisoners that stretched for miles along a frozen road. The temperature was minus 15 degrees Celsius. They had been marching for 4 days with minimal food and no shelter. The Germans called it evacuation. The prisoners called it a death march. Men collapsed from exhaustion and hypothermia. German guards sometimes shot those who fell. More often they simply left them in the snow to die. Richardson's last letter to Ellen had been written on January 15, 11 days before the evacuation. The letter had been about Christmas. He had described a church service in the camp. Mentioned carols sung in English and French and Norwegian. Written about thinking of Ellen during hymns they had sung together at their wedding. The letter was genuine sentiment and zero intelligence. By the time he wrote it, the escape committees had dissolved. The coded letter system had ended. What remained was only human connection. The letter would not reach Ellen until March 1945. It would arrive the same week the war in Europe was clearly ending. By then she would have received a telegram from the War Department stating that her husband's status had changed from prisoner of war to missing in movement. The telegram provided no details. Just that the camp had been evacuated and Richardson's location was unknown. The letter, when it arrived weeks later, would be evidence from before the disappearance. A ghost speaking from the past. But in January 1945, Richardson did not know about telegrams or worried wives or the end of the war. He knew cold, hunger, exhaustion. The man next to him in the column was a navigator from New Zealand named Peters who had worked in the camp's forgery section creating fake documents. Peters talked constantly to stay conscious. He talked about home. About food he wanted to eat. About his wife waiting in Auckland. Richardson mostly listened. His feet were numb. His thoughts were slow. Conversation required energy he was not sure he had. The column reached a rail yard on January 31st. The prisoners were loaded into boxcars designed for 8 horses or 40 men. The Germans packed 60 prisoners into each car. There was no heat. No sanitation. Minimal ventilation. The doors were locked from the outside. The train began moving west, away from the advancing Soviet forces. The journey would take 6 days. Inside the boxcar, Richardson stood pressed against other prisoners. There was no room to sit. They took turns leaning against each other to rest. The cold was absolute. Breathing hurt. Ice formed on the walls of the boxcar from their collective breath. Men urinated where they stood because there was no alternative. The smell was overwhelming. Some men stopped talking. Others could not stop talking. The difference marked who would survive. On February 3rd, the train stopped. The doors opened. Guards shouted in German. The prisoners stumbled out into daylight. They were at a camp called Stalag VII-A near Moosburg, Germany. The camp had been designed for 10,000 prisoners. It now held more than 76,000. Prisoners from camps across Germany and Poland were being consolidated as the front lines collapsed. The food system had broken down. The housing was overwhelmed. Men slept on bare ground. Disease spread unchecked. Richardson found a space in a barracks building that held 400 men in a structure designed for 200. Wooden bunks 3 levels high. No mattresses. No blankets unless you had carried them from your previous camp. Richardson had carried nothing. He shared a bunk with Peters. They took turns sleeping while the other kept watch. Theft was constant. Men stole from each other out of desperation rather than malice. Everything had value now. A piece of bread. A tin cup. Scraps of paper. The letter system was finished. No mail arrived at Stalag VII-A. No mail was sent out. The Red Cross could not keep up with the chaos of camps being evacuated and consolidated. Families across America and Britain and Australia had no information about their imprisoned sons and husbands and brothers. Ellen Richardson checked her mailbox every morning. The letters had stopped in January. She told herself it was because of the evacuation. That mail would resume when he reached a new camp. She did not allow herself to think about the alternatives. On February 20th, Richardson developed dysentery. It spread through the camp in waves. The latrines were open pits that overflowed. The water supply was contaminated. Men died from dehydration faster than from starvation. Richardson's fever climbed. He became delirious. Peters brought him water when he could find any. Wet rags to cool his forehead. Kept him alive through force of will more than medicine. In these weeks, Richardson thought about the letters. About the codes he had embedded in sentiment. About Ellen reading words that meant two different things. About the murders after the escape. About the gap between what families understood and what prisoners lived. The delirium made it all confused. He was not sure which memories were real and which were fever dreams. He remembered writing letters. Could not remember what they had said. The distinction between coded and genuine seemed meaningless now. By March 1945, Richardson had recovered enough to walk. The camp was disintegrating. German guards were disappearing. Food distribution had become irregular, then stopped entirely. Prisoners survived by trading what little they had. A button for a potato. A belt buckle for a piece of bread. Richardson had nothing to trade. He scavenged in garbage pits. Found potato peels. Ate them raw. Dignity had become an unaffordable luxury. On April 15th, Ellen Richardson received a letter from the War Department. Her husband's status had been changed to liberated, but his condition was unknown. The letter explained that Allied forces were overrunning prison camps faster than information could be processed. Richardson might be in a field hospital. Might be in transit to Britain or France. Might already be en route to the United States. Details would follow when available. Ellen read the letter 3 times. Tried to understand what liberated but condition unknown meant. Tried not to think about what condition might make someone's status unknown even after liberation. Richardson's liberation came on April 29, 1945. American tanks from Patton's Third Army arrived at Stalag VII-A at approximately 2 p.m. The German guards had fled during the night. Prisoners crowded against the fences watching the tanks approach. When the lead tank crashed through the main gate, prisoners screamed, cried, collapsed. Richardson stood near the back of the crowd. He watched American soldiers climb down from their tanks and stare at the prisoners. Watched the soldiers' faces change as they understood what they were seeing. The soldiers were not prepared for what they found. 76,000 prisoners in various stages of starvation and disease. Men who weighed less than 100 pounds. Men covered in lice. Men who could barely walk. Men who could not stop talking. Men who could not speak at all. The liberation was not the joyful moment anyone had imagined. It was confused and chaotic and overwhelming. The soldiers did not know what to do. The prisoners did not know how to be free. Richardson was processed through a series of field hospitals. First near Munich, then Reims. Finally a military hospital outside London. At each location he was weighed, examined, interviewed. His weight was 127 pounds, down from 165 before capture. He had dysentery, pneumonia, severe malnutrition, and trench foot. The doctors said he needed months of recovery. He asked to send a telegram to Ellen. They said he could once he reached Britain. The telegram was delivered to Ellen Richardson on May 7, 1945. The same day Germany surrendered. Richardson's message was simple, alive. In London. Coming home soon. I love you. Ellen held the telegram and cried at her kitchen table. Thought about the letters she had saved. All the words about weather and memories and longing. All the normal sentences that had hidden extraordinary information she never knew was there. The telegram was different. Direct. Clear. Unfiltered by censors or codes. Just truth. Richardson remained in Britain for 6 weeks. He was treated for infections and malnutrition. Slowly gained weight. Began physical therapy to recover his ability to walk normally. During this time he was debriefed by intelligence officers. They asked about his time in Stalag Luft III. About the escape. About the murder of 50 prisoners. About the evacuation march. Richardson answered their questions. Provided details. Named names. Described locations. The debriefing took 3 days. On the second day of debriefing, a MI9 officer mentioned the letters. the coded messages Richardson had sent, the intelligence they had provided. The officer thanked Richardson for his service, explained that the letters had been critical to coordinating resistance networks during the escape attempt, that the intelligence about German troop movements had been valuable to Allied planning. Richardson listened, felt strange hearing his private correspondence to his wife discussed as intelligence products, realized that Ellen still did not know any of this. The MI9 officer asked if Richardson planned to tell his wife about the codes. Richardson had not thought about it, had not considered how to explain that the letters expressing his love had simultaneously been intelligence reports, that his words to her had always been genuine but had also always been something else, that German censors and British intelligence officers had read every word before she had. The officer said the cipher system was still classified, that Richardson was not authorized to discuss it with anyone outside military intelligence, that the truth would have to remain hidden. Richardson arrived in New York on June 18, 1945. He took a train to Wisconsin. Ellen met him at the station. They stood on the platform looking at each other. Richardson was 40 pounds lighter than when he had deployed. His uniform hung loose. His face was different. Ellen had aged in ways that had nothing to do with time. They held each other without speaking. Words seemed inadequate after 2 years of letters that said everything and nothing. That night at the farmhouse, Ellen showed Richardson the wooden box containing his letters. She had saved all of them. He sat at the kitchen table and read them. Saw his own handwriting from prison camps in Germany and Poland. Read words he had written in code about escapes and guard towers and tunnel depths. Saw only what Ellen could see, expressions of love and longing and hope. The intelligence was invisible again. The codes were unreadable even to him without the key he had memorized. The letters had become what they appeared to be. Messages from one person to another across distance and danger. Richardson and Ellen never discussed the codes. The MI9 classification remained in effect. The war was over but the secrets endured. Richardson returned to work. Tried to resume life. The nightmares continued for years. He would wake up in the middle of the night thinking he was still in the boxcar or on the march or in the camp. Ellen would hold him until he remembered where he was. Neither spoke about what they had lost. Neither questioned what they had gained. They were alive. That seemed like enough. In 1947, Ellen gave birth to their first child. A daughter they named Margaret. Richardson held the infant and thought about the letters he had written from the camp. About the future he had imagined but not believed in. About Ellen reading those letters and allowing herself to hope. The baby was evidence that hope had been justified. That the performance of normalcy encoded letters had pointed toward something real. The letters remained in the wooden box. Ellen could not throw them away. They represented the only connection she had had with her husband during the war. Richardson rarely looked at them. They reminded him of too much. The gap between what he had written and what had actually been happening. The men who had died during the escape. The murder of 50 prisoners. The death march. The starvation at Moosburg. The letters were from a different person. Someone who had not yet experienced those things. He could not fully recognize himself in that handwriting. The classification of World War II prisoner codes remained in effect through the 1960s. As Cold War tensions increased, intelligence agencies determined that methods used in World War II might still be relevant. The cipher systems were considered operational secrets. Prisoners who had used them were prohibited from discussing them in memoirs or interviews. The families who had received the letters never learned what they had actually contained. Richardson died in 1982. He was 61 years old. Heart attack at work. Ellen found him at the hospital. He had never told her about the codes. Never violated the classification. Never explained why he had spent 4 hours writing letters about Wisconsin weather and family memories. Ellen kept the letters. Stored them with other family documents. Considered them private correspondence. Had no reason to think they were anything else. In 2003, the British government began declassifying World War II intelligence documents. The process was slow and incomplete. Some files remained sealed. Others were released with heavy redactions. Among the declassified materials were MI9 records related to prisoner correspondence. Descriptions of cipher systems. Copies of decoded letters. Names of prisoners who had participated in the intelligence gathering network. A researcher at the Imperial War Museum named Dr. Sarah Chen was studying MI9 operations in German prison camps. She was analyzing the intelligence gathering systems that had operated inside the camps. Going through declassified files, she found references to Stalag Luft III. Found descriptions of the coded letter system. Found copies of letters from Captain James Richardson to his wife Ellen. Found the decoded versions showing what the letters had actually meant. Dr. Chen understood immediately what she was looking at. A complete record of dual communication. The surface text that families read. The hidden intelligence that MI9 decoded. She could see both layers simultaneously. Could understand what Ellen Richardson had read and what she had missed. Could see the gap between apparent meaning and actual content. The letters were extraordinary historical documents. Evidence of how prisoners maintained agency inside captivity. How families maintained hope without full information. How words could mean multiple things at once. Dr. Chen contacted Ellen Richardson in 2004. Ellen was 88 years old. Still living in Wisconsin. Still had the wooden box with the letters. Dr. Chen explained what she had found in the MI9 files. Explained that the letters Ellen had saved for 60 years had contained encoded intelligence about escape plans and guard rotations and tunnel locations. That the words about weather and memories and longing had been carefully constructed to hide operational information. That German censors and British intelligence officers had been reading the letters long before Ellen had. Ellen's response was silence. Then questions. Had her husband been lying to her? Had the expressions of love been performative? Had any of it been real? Dr. Chen tried to explain that the codes did not invalidate the sentiment. That Richardson's love had been genuine even though his words carried double meaning. That the two layers could coexist. But Ellen was 88 years old and the person she had spent 37 years married to had kept a fundamental secret from her. Even after the classification ended. Even when he could have told her. He had chosen not to. She was not sure she could forgive that. Dr. Chen asked if she could see the original letters. Ellen agreed. She brought the wooden box to London. Sat in Dr. Chen's office while the researcher examined each letter with the decoded MI9 versions for comparison. Ellen watched Dr. Chen read the letters. Saw her make notes. Saw her compare the surface text with the hidden messages. Saw her smile at certain phrases. Ellen felt like she was watching her own memories be dissected. One letter stood out. The letter from March 1944 about their honeymoon. Dr. Chen explained that this letter had contained details about the escape plan. The restaurant. The wallpaper. The river walk. All of it was code. But then Dr. Chen noticed something the MI9 officers had missed. Within the coded information was another pattern. A message using the same cipher system but encoding something different. Not intelligence. Something personal. Dr. Chen decoded the personal message. It was a single sentence hidden across multiple seemingly innocent phrases. A sentence only Ellen could have understood if she had known the cipher. The sentence read, "I am still myself despite everything. I am afraid you will not recognize me when I return. I hope you can forgive what I have become." Ellen cried when Dr. Chen read it to her. The message had been in the letter for 60 years. Hidden within the intelligence about escape tunnels and guard towers. Richardson had encoded his fear and his hope and his apology into a letter that Ellen had read dozens of times. She had known something was beneath the surface. Had felt it without being able to name it. Had searched for meaning she could not find. The meaning had been there all along. Invisible. Patient. Waiting. Dr. Chen published her research in 2005. The book was titled Coded Hearts. Prisoner Correspondence and Hidden Intelligence in World War II. It included Richardson's letters with both layers decoded, the operational intelligence and the personal message. The book won awards. Was reviewed positively. Established Dr. Chen as an expert on World War II prisoner communications. But the book was not really about intelligence. It was about the cost of secrets. The gap between what people say and what they mean. The way war forces people into performative versions of themselves. Ellen Richardson was interviewed for the book. She was 89. She sat in her living room and talked about receiving letters from Germany. About the relief when they arrived. About the fear during gaps. About reading them over and over searching for reassurance. About never knowing they contained anything beyond what the words appeared to say. About learning the truth 60 years later and feeling both betrayed and awed. About understanding her husband had loved her and had used that love as camouflage for intelligence. About not knowing which made her angrier. The wooden box containing the letters was donated to the Imperial War Museum in 2006. Ellen died 6 months later. The letters are now preserved in climate-controlled storage. Available to researchers by appointment. They are displayed occasionally in exhibitions about prisoner correspondence. Schoolchildren on field trips look at them through glass. Read the surface text. Are told about the hidden codes. The letters have become historical artifacts. Evidence of larger patterns. Part of the official record. But what the museum exhibits cannot show is what the letters meant to the people who wrote and received them. The immediate physical sensation of Ellen holding an envelope postmarked from Germany. The fear and relief. The way she studied the handwriting. The words she memorized. The hope she forced herself to maintain. What cannot be displayed is Richardson in a prison barracks in Poland, writing carefully chosen words while other prisoners talked or slept or planned escapes around him. The concentration required. The fear of making mistakes. The mental effort of encoding intelligence while expressing genuine emotion. The letters were not just intelligence products or historical documents. They were lifelines. Proof of continued existence. Evidence of love under impossible conditions. The fact that they also contained military information does not diminish their human function. The codes and the sentiment were not separate. They coexisted because humans are complex. Because communication operates on multiple levels. Because prisoners needed to maintain both their military identity and their personal identity simultaneously. What Ellen Richardson understood after learning about the codes was that her husband had been forced to perform normalcy while living through trauma, that the letters were both truth and theater, that he had protected her from reality while asking her to believe in a future he was not sure would arrive, that the act of writing letters full of hope when hope was nearly impossible was itself a form of courage separate from military valor. Today, thousands of prisoner letters sit in archives across America and Britain and Australia. Most have never been examined for codes. Most families never learned whether their loved ones' letters contained hidden intelligence. The cipher systems were so subtle and so varied that detecting them requires knowledge of specific codes used by specific prisoners. Many prisoners took the knowledge to their graves. The secrets remain buried in seemingly innocent correspondence about weather and food and memories. But the deeper truth is that all prisoner letters contain codes. Not necessarily military intelligence, but coded expressions of fear and hope and determination. Carefully constructed sentences designed to reassure families while concealing the full reality of captivity. Prisoners could not write what they actually experienced, could not describe the hunger or the cold or the fear or the violence. The letters were necessarily performances, versions of truth that families could bear to read. And families became expert decoders of a different kind of message, learning to read between lines, to understand what was not said, to detect changes in handwriting or tone that might indicate distress, to maintain hope based on minimal information, to believe in continued existence despite silence. The communication was always imperfect, always incomplete, always filtered through censorship and fear and the limits of language. What remains now are the letters themselves. Words on paper, some containing encoded intelligence, all containing encoded emotion. Testaments to the human need for connection across distance and danger. Proof that people find ways to communicate even when systems are designed to prevent it. Evidence that love persists through war. That identity survives captivity. That hope can be maintained through performance until performance becomes reality. The codes and the letters that families never understood were there all along. Invisible, essential, human.